Justin Yifulin was the chief economist with the World Bank. He is currently a renowned professor of economics with Peking University. Today I have a great honor to interview him about whether opening up of China's financial services will help ease the tensions in the current trade war between the United States and China. We'll also look at the issue of internationalizing RMB. Professor Yifulin cited examples of Deutsche marks, Japanese yen, and US dollars to illustrate that there is not necessarily a relationship between strict management of the capital account and internationalization of the currencies. We also went on to discuss the economic reform and Prime Minister Modi, because President Xi Jinping will meet with the Indian Prime Minister on the sidelines of the Qingdao SCO summit. We'll figure out whether there will be more economic complementarities between the two major economies in Asia, and whether this will help build a better relationship and trust. Welcome to Dialogue, sir.
My pleasure.
President Trump tweeted he's glad that China is ready to protect intellectual property rights. Do you think this is a major concern for the primacy of digital technology in the new era?
I think that, first let me say, Trump's adopt those kind of tariff measures in the name of the trade balance between China and the US. But his proposed measure actually will not reduce the trade imbalance. Certainly, intellectual property right protection is an important thing for the US as a high-income country. They are on the global technological frontiers. And China now increasingly rely on innovation for our further development. And as with that, intellectual property right protection is also important. But sometimes Trump's mixed, the reasons of the US trade imbalance with the intellectual property right issues. And so we move in these directions. It's good for China, it's good for the US, but actually I don't think that will contribute much to the reduction of the US trade imbalance.
What do you think of the driving force to sustain China's economy?
Certainly, continue to reform, continue to open up, and also to rely on innovation as a driver for the growth. And innovation is the way to enhance the productivities. In the past, China was a lower income economy. China had a much technological gap with the advanced country. So China could benefit from the latecomers' advantage by importation, by absorbing the existing technology to achieve the technological innovation and technological upgrading. Certainly, China still has a large room in that area. However, now China is a high middle income country. Some sectors, China is already the global leaders, or very close to the global leaders. And China also faces some kind of new challenges. For example, the climate change, environmental pollutions. And China needs to be a leader in those areas. So by that, China also needs to increasingly rely on indigenous innovation as a way to achieve technological innovation in the industrial upgrading.
In the United States, Republicans and Democrats have long started their process of reassessing the Chinese influence, and particularly the policy of engagement that started since 1972 when Richard Nixon came over and opened the door between the two countries. Having said this, with the relationship declines sharply regarding trust, there's always the chronic issue of a trust deficit between the two countries. Do you think will no longer benefit from the exchange of students, scholars, and scientific research in sensitive areas like high technology, because there will be serious measures about visa restrictions for Chinese talented professionals. And do you believe our enormous input into R&D will be seriously undermined because of the U.S. Protectionism?
I think that protectionism is not good for U.S.
But will China be stopped?
Protectionism certainly is not good for China and for the world. And I think that since 1972, Nixon knocked open the Chinese door, it benefited China. But it also contributed to the global peace, global stability, global development. And the U.S. is a global leader in technologies. And U.S. need to continuously to be inventive society. And to have the invention is very important to have talented people. And the talented people relies not only on the people who now born in the U.S. or American citizen. It also draws the talented from the rest of the world, including India, Chinese. It's also from the Europe, from other countries. I think that to have more Chinese students to study in the U.S., to work in the U.S. companies, it's very important for U.S. to continue to be the technological leaders. Certainly in this process, we also learn, and there's something like trade. It's always a win-win for both sides. It's not only benefit China, but it also equally benefits U.S.
The export-led boom is over, I'm afraid, with enormous efforts on both sides to balance the trade. Do you foresee sharp decline in our forex reserves as a result?
I think that the way to describe Chinese model as an export-led growth, I don't quite fully agree, because in the process, China also import a lot. If you look into the export growth and the import growth, they are almost parallel. Although in some years, export growth is higher, and especially China is a developing country, and China would have to accumulate more capital for investment. Our shipping rate is higher, and so we have some trade surplus. But the trade surplus in most years is around 2%, 3%. It's common for any developing country. And, but overall, China has a very strong export growth. But China also has a very strong import growth. So that's one thing, because we rely on the international market, but we also open up the domestic market for the world in order to access to resources, capital, management know-how, as well as technology. That's one thing. But I agree. The export as a percentage of China's GDP will decline. It's mainly because of stage of development. China now is a high middle income country. At this stage, manufacturing is the main part of Chinese economy. And manufacturing is tradable. So China will export, but certainly China also import technology parts from other countries. But China will gradually reach high income stage. And in the high income stage, service will become increasingly important, because we know, high income country, GDP coming, service in general contribute to their GDP more than 75%, or even more than 80%. And most services is not tradable. So by that, China will increasingly rely on the demand in the domestic market to drive the growth. But it's just a stage of development phenomenon. So I would say yes, domestic demand will become increasingly important, and it is because the stage of development is different.
How do you look at the risks that may occur when we open up the financial services, including the insurance industry?
Well, I think that everything has two sides, and so open up the financial market will be helpful. But at the same time, open up of the financial market will bring with it some kind of risk. And so we need to learn from other countries or some other economy experiences, and to have a better regulation framework, and also to pay attention to some emerging sides in order to avoid black swan or to avoid the gray rhino.
Many economists follow the Plaza Accord in the 1980s between the United States and Japan. They are two allies, and yet trade war was very brutal. What lessons can we draw from the stagnation of the Japanese economy with the sharp appreciation of their yen?
Well, let me respond in this way. In the 1980s, Plaza Accord was a result of trade imbalances between the U.S. and Japan. At the time, U.S. had large trade deficit with Japan, and the U.S. argued it was because of under-evaluation of Japanese currency, its unfair trade arrangement of Japanese economy, and so in the Plaza Accord, the U.S. forced Japan to sharply appreciate its currency, and also to have established trend in its export to the U.S., and in a way, that asked the U.S. Japan to relocate their production, like a car production, to the U.S. But we see for the result. Certainly, it brought a huge harm to the Japanese economy, and it was a preliminary reason for the financial crisis in Japan in the 1990s. That's one thing. Japan was hurt. But did that really help the U.S. to address its trade imbalance? No. Actually, after the 1980s, U.S. trade imbalances only shipped from Japan to China. And its trade deficit has been increasing larger and larger. And it was because U.S. did not really address its own problem. The reason for U.S. to have a large trade deficit is because the saving rate in the U.S. is too low. And the U.S. dollar is the global reserve currencies. And U.S. has the privilege of printing U.S. dollar to pay for its trade imbalances. Those are the two main reasons for the U.S. to have trade imbalances and to be sustained for so long. And actually, the U.S. trade imbalances was not because of China. It is because of its internal problem. That's one thing. And secondly, it's also because at the beginning I say, yes, we announced we wanted to further open up our economy. We wanted to, implement our promise in the financial sector openness. We promised to adopt measures to implement the protection of intellectual property right. We do that because that's good for China. Those are essential for our further development. But we are not, respond to the U.S. pressure to do something which are not good for China, because we want to avoid what happened in Japan in the 1980s.
Thank you so much. You are watching Dialogue with Professor Lin Yifu, a former chief economist with the World Bank. We're discussing trade standoff between the United States and China and what can be done to strengthen our competitive edge in response. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Are you suggesting that we won't easily open up our capital account?
We will open up our capital account.
Are you talking about the hot money?
That does not contribute to the improvement of productivity in any country.
Welcome back. Following the Plaza Accord, what happened across the Pacific Ocean was massive investment by the Japanese in the purchase of properties, and yet some of them turned out to be bubbles, and the Japanese suffered heavily. Similarly, it seems we saw outbound flight of capital and tightening the grip of such outflow of our capital in recent months. Do you think this will seriously undermine the ambition of Belt and Road Initiative in underdeveloped countries?
The Plaza Accord, and after that, actually, on the one hand, appreciation of Japanese currency. On the other hand, liberalizing the capital account control allowed the Japanese, capital to flow abroad. And because appreciation of Japanese currency, so it makes almost everything so inexpensive in the world. And you see a lot of investment in real estate, in speculative area to buy the paintings.
Like one dark group of Wang Jianlin.
Yeah, right. And so those would not contribute to the enhancement of the productivities. It's not a real investment. Those kind of investment were speculative, and certainly, any speculation will come to the burst bubble someday. And so, in the opening up of Chinese capital account, we also need to learn from that. We would like to encourage investment in the real sectors.
Are you suggesting that we won't easily open up our capital account, and therefore convertibility of RMB will remain a stake?
I think that first, we will open up our capital account, but capital account openness has several different components. Foreign direct investment in and out will be desirable. Foreign direct investment to, in the real sectors, which will be desirable. But we need to be very careful about the portfolio flow, both out and in. For that, we need to have good regulation and supervision.
Are you talking about the hot money?
Hot money, yes.
Yeah.
That does not contribute to the improvement of productivity in any country. It just tries to arbitrage the difference in the interest rate, cost of capital, and sometimes it will, boost the speculations, and those kind of things we need to be very careful. But capital account control or capital account liberalization is not a precondition for a currency to be a global reserve currency. We know. Before 1971, before the collapse of Bretton Woods system, every country adopted a certain kind of capital account control. But at that time, US dollar is global reserve currency, right? And at that time, even Japanese yen and Deutsche Mark, they all had capital account control, but they are also accepted as a global reserve currency. So we need to separate these two things. Whether Chinese currency can be a global reserve currency. I think yes, because China now is the largest trading country. And Chinese market measured by market exchange rate is the second largest. Measured by the purchasing power parity, China is already the largest market in the world. And so no matter China's export and China's import, certainly to use Chinese currency as a unit of account will be convenient for every country that with trading relation with China. And I think by that, US dollars, Chinese yuan were increasingly accepted as a trade, accounting the currency, and also overall Chinese economy is stable, Chinese currency is on the path of appreciation, and the Chinese currency will be treated as a good reserve currency. So you know, recently, European Central Bank also converted some of the US dollars into the Chinese yuan, and it's a very good step.
No one wants to put all eggs into the same basket. Having said this, how do you assess the implications of the oil futures in the Shanghai stock market? Do you think this will help stabilize the strength of RMB, its exchange regime, or it will lay groundwork further for settlement of major commodities such as energy between China and oil-rich economies?
I think it's a step, a very small step, in a very small niche markets.
Small but very significant.
And whether that will be, increasingly important and increasingly cover more type of oil, production oil markets. It also depends on how the U.S. regulate, or how the U.S. And it's how the U.S. monetary policy, are they going to some self-restraint, or are they going to continue to increase the money supply, and also depends on whether the U.S. domestic economy is going to fully recover from 2008 global crisis or not. If the U.S. can have a more stable monetary policy, and if the U.S. can resume its dynamism in economic growth, I think that U.S. dollar will still be the main currency that are used in the trade of the oil, and that status will be maintained. But if there's some policy, which really destabilize the global economy, destabilize the global oil markets, then Chinese currency will be a much better alternative. And by that, Shanghai oil, future market, exchange market, its role will be increasing.
One major problem with the emerging markets, I'm afraid, is the phasing out, allegedly, of the QE, quantitative easing. We're talking about the monetary market and fiscal policies in the emerging markets. This year, we witnessed an improvement of the bilateral relationship between India and China, the elephant and the dragon, particularly at the upcoming SCO summit in Qingdao. What do you think of the economic complementarity between these two major economies in Asia?
I think it's a dilemma for the U.S. and for the world, because if the U.S. to phase out the quantitative easing, and also to raise the interest rate, to tightening its monetary supply, it's essential for maintaining its health or its financial sectors. But at the same time, in the short run, it will raise the capital cost. It may push down its stock equity markets, and it also can cause some kind of tension, some kind of pressure on its real economy. But at the same time, if the U.S. continue to have a quantitative easing, it will have a large capital outflow to the developing country. And when the U.S. raises the interest rate, it can cause some kind of inflow of outflow of capital from developing countries from other parts of the world back to the U.S. And that can also cause some kind of challenges. So under this kind of situation, because U.S. dollar is a global reserve currency, the most important global reserve currency, and U.S. has the responsibility to coordinate its monetary policy with the rest of the world, not only for the U.S. domestic consideration, it also needs to coordinate with other central banks in order to mitigate the possible challenges. That's one thing. And secondly, every country should be preparing for the challenges, because we cannot count on the goodwill of the U.S. Authority when they decide their monetary policy. And so we need to prepare ourselves. In case U.S. continue to raise the interest rate, certainly it will pose some kind of challenges of capital outflow, and how we can avoid to mitigate the negative impact of capital outflow when the U.S. raise the interest rate.
Infrastructure remains the vulnerability of the Indian economy. With the trade war and tax reform by President Trump, do you forecast outflow of foreign investment from China to other low-income economies such as India to compensate for their manufacturing industry, and particularly in the infrastructure area? Because they need money, they need investment. And do you think the trade war between China and the United States will favor the boom of the Indian economy? Last year saw a decline in the GDP growth rate of the Indian economy, despite the ambitious blueprint of Prime Minister Modi to reform its money and taxation system. Do you think what happens between China and the United States will benefit India, which is waiting in the wing?
I think those are two separate issues. Trade war is not good for China, not good for the U.S., and it increases uncertainty. So it's not good for any country in the world. So we can see the response of equity market, not only in the U.S., but also other countries when Trump announced its trade measures, right? So that's not good. But I think the cooperations between China and India certainly will be desirable, because if there's more cooperation between China and India, then we will be in a much better position to, to voice our concern to Trump about its measures, negative impacts on other countries. That's one thing. And then secondly, separate from the trade world, because China's comparative advantages is in the infrastructure, construction, in the infrastructure supply in terms of its material for the construction. And China also has the advantage of funding. India is in a shortage of infrastructure. If India wants to achieve its aspiration of higher growth, to reduce the bottleneck of its infrastructure will be essential. So we do see, areas of cooperation which are beneficial to both sides, and according to our, difference in the comparative advantages, certainly we hope that India can also have higher growth to achieve its national dream, just like we want to have higher growth and high quality growth in order to achieve our national dream. So the visit of Prime Minister Modi to China will be certainly welcomed.
Thank you so much. I do appreciate it. Thanks a lot.